record. So today we're going to solve sum and difference of cubes. And so yesterday you factored them. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is factor them. So I'm going to do that rather quickly and then show you how to solve them. Okay. So first thing is we're going to factor them. Remember your formulas from yesterday that I botched up, but now they're good. So we're going to take the cube roots of both. We get x and 1. So your first factor is x plus 1. Your second factor is going to be square the first, change the sign, multiply them together, square the last. So that's what we did yesterday. Now we're just adding equals 0 to it. And then you set both equal to 0. The first one is always going to be easy. And I showed you a cheater method to it. So we're going to take x plus 1 and set it equal to 0. To solve, we subtract 1 and we get -1. Now realize that if it's a cube, like your highest power is x cubed, we should have 3 answers. This is only 1 answer. That's not the full answer. So make sure you finish it out. So the way that you finish it out is that second factor will never, ever, ever be good. Okay, so you cannot factor it. All you can do is use quadratic formula. So on this one, we're using quadratic formula where a is 1, b is -1, and c is 1. So the second one will always be quadratic formula. So x equals, we have a -1, so negative b is +1. And let me write that up there. X equals -b plus or minus big fat square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember that from the other unit. Okay. X equals -b plus or minus big fat square root. You can either do -1 squared. I always do 1 squared. So from now on, I'll do the positive, but I want to show you that I do actually use the negative. But when we squared, it becomes positive. Minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Remember what I told you? Excuse me. I only do what's underneath in my calculator, so then I can reduce it. So we've already done all of this. So -1 squared, the -1 has to be in parentheses. Minus 4 times 1 times 1 gives us -3. So we get x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of -3 over 2. The next step is to look at your square root and see if there's anything that I can simplify. Since it has the negative underneath, I'm going to take that out. And the way I take that out is I put an I. And then 3 will not reduce. It only multiplies down or factors down into 1 and 3. So these are your other 2 answers. 1 plus I square root of 3 over 2. And 1 minus I square root of 3 over 2. So those 2 answers, and there's your third one. You should always have 3 answers. Got it? These are imaginary. They will not show up. Okay? They will not show up on the graph. So if we do your next one, excuse me, it's the same way. We take the cube root. So we have x and 3. Yesterday we were factoring. We said use the sign of the problem in the first. Square the first, change the sign, multiply them together, square the last. And just like I told you, this one is perfect. You can use the little cheater method on it. What that means is if it's +3 inside, when I take it outside, it's going to be -3. Or you can do all the work like we did on the first one. The second one is always going to be quadratic formula. Always going to be quadratic formula. So x equals, a is 1, b is -3, and c is 9. So a -b is +3 plus or minus big fat square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Again, just do what's under the radical. Excuse me. 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9 gives me a negative 27. Sorry, I should say x equals. I don't want to squeeze it up. Plus or minus square root of negative 27 over 2. Remember, you're going to pull out an I, so we're going to start with 3 plus or minus. I'm going to put a space here because I'm going to put the number in front because I know that it's going to work, okay? I'm going to break it down. 27 is 3 times 3 times 3. We're looking for pairs, so that's going to go on the outside. We left a 3 on the inside over 2. The last thing you check is this triangle of numbers. It will not reduce, so this is your final answer. I'm hoping that we'll get one in these that'll reduce, okay? All right, so I'm actually going to skip 3 and 5 because they are the same. They're pretty much the same. They're just subtracting rather than adding. It is the same thing. So I'm going to go to this one because we'll have different numbers. We have x and 5 is our cube root. So our first factor is x minus 5. Our second factor is square the first, change the sign, multiply them together, square the last. Your first answer is going to be the opposite of the first factor. So positive 5. We have a factor of negative 5. We have an answer of positive 5. The second one, you have to use quadratic formula. X equals negative b will be negative 5 plus or minus big fat square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, I didn't write out your a, b, and c because at this point you should know what that is. A was 1, b was 5, and c was 25. Do what's underneath the radical. So 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25. We get the square root of negative 75 over 2. The negative means we're going to pull out an I. If you want to put that there just to know, 75 is 25 times 3. So there's a pair of 5s. So when we simplify this, it's going to be negative 5 plus or minus. I'm taking out a pair of 5s and an I. I left a 3 divided by 2. The triangle of numbers 5, 5, and 2 will not reduce. All right. I will show you number 6 so that you can see the difference in the answers, and then we'll go back and do the other 2 without having to do any work at all, okay? So this is the same thing. It just has a plus instead of a minus. So we're going to get the same thing, x squared, but this is going to be a minus 5x plus 25. So all of your numbers are pretty much the same. Here's the difference. Your first difference is your first one is going to be changed. Okay, so see the difference in these two. And the only thing we did was went from a negative to a positive in the problem, okay? In the second one, we're going to have x equals positive 5 plus or minus big fat square root 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25 all over 2 times 1. The only thing that changes, if you guys look between this, is this number and this number, the sign. You see that? So then when we finish out our answer, it should look exactly the same, except for this one is going to be positive plus or minus 5i square root of 3 over 2. So again, the only thing that changes is the sign. Okay. So I'm going to actually look at number 5, but I'm going to look at number 1 at the same time. So I want you to be able to see both of those. All right. So number 5 is x to the third. All we need are the answers. X to the third minus 1, and number 1 was x to the third plus 1. Okay. So only thing I changed was the signs. So if you've already done it once, there's your answers. What I told you was that your signs will change. So the first one will be x equals 1. And the second one will be -1 plus or minus I square root of 3 over 2. That is the only thing that will change. That's it. So then number 3 and number 2 look exactly the same, except for number 3 is a minus and number 2 is a plus. So same problem, just changing the signs. So your first answer will be +3. Your second answer, instead of 3 plus or minus 3I square root of 3 over 2, it's going to be -3 plus or minus 3I square root of 3 over 2. So what I would suggest is make sure that you write these problems down, because if you get ones like this on your EDIA assignment today, you can just change the signs and you don't have to do all the work. Okay, so watch that. All right, look at your next one. 7 and 9 are basically the same problem, and 8 and 10 are basically the same problem. You guys see it. So we'll work one of each and then we'll change the signs and we'll be done. So for x to the third, we get x. 64, the cube root is 4. So our first is x plus 4, square the first, change the sign, multiply them together, square the last. Again, that's from yesterday. Our first answer, instead of a +4, will be -4. Your second one, you're going to do quadratic formula. X equals -b, so we have a -4, so it's going to change to +4. Plus or minus big fat square root, 4 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Only do what's underneath the radical. Do not put that square root in. Don't put that square root sign in. That gives us -48, so this one's going to simplify. So we know that we're going to pull an I out. So you might want to just write that there to remind yourself. 48 is 6 times 8. 6 is 3 and 2. 8 is 2, 2, and 2. So if you guys look, we have 2 pairs of 2. That means a 4 comes out. 2 2s come out. So we get 4 plus or minus 4i. I did not circle the 3. All over 2. So we haven't had one yet, but we have one now, where your triangle of numbers will reduce, and it reduces by 2. So your answer is going to be 4 divided by 2 is 2, plus or minus 4 divided by 2 is 2. Do not touch the I or square root of 3. And on the bottom, we would have a 1. 2 over 2 is 1. So our final answer for x is 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 3. We do not need the 1. So then either Zoomers or anybody in class, I only have 2 people in class, so Zoomers is probably more on you than it is on them. What are my 2 answers for number 9? Your first one is, come on guys.
4.
Yeah, don't waste your homework time. It's a quick thing. Your second one's going to be what?
-2i plus or minus, oh.
You're right. You're good. I got what you were saying. -2 plus or minus 2i square root of 3. The only thing that changes is that front number sign. Perfect. Great job. All right, so we didn't even have to do the work. Let's do number 8, then get the answers for number 10, and we'll be done and you can do your work, okay? So we have x and 2. So we're going to start factoring. We have x minus 2. Square the first, change the sign, multiply them together, square the last. Okay. Your first answer is the opposite sign, so positive 2. Your second one, you have to do quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Two squared minus 4 times a times c is negative 12. Negative 12, you're going to pull out an I. Your factors of 12 are 4 times 3, so 2, 2, and 3. We see a pair of 2s. And if you want to circle the I because you know you pull that out, that's perfectly fine as well. Okay. Negative 2 plus or minus. I pulled out a 2 and an I. I left a 3 divided by 2. Last step, check your triangle of numbers. They are all divisible by 2. So we're going to get negative 1 plus or minus 1I square root of 3 over 2. I'm sorry, over 1. Ignore that I put a 2 there. And then remember that you don't need 2 of those ones. You need the first one. The first one you have to have. This one is just like having 1x. You don't need it. So you can just have I square root of 3. And then we don't need over 1. So there's your actual answer that you will see. And then tell me what number 10 answers are. If number 8 was 2 and negative 1 plus or minus I square root of 3, what is number 10 going to be? X equals negative 2. And X equals what you think? Guys, you're wasting homework time. Zoomers, answer. What is it going to be?
1 plus or minus I square root of 3.
Thank you. Maybe I should give you some extra credit for answering while you're on the remote right here. Thank you. And that's it. So make sure that you're always doing quadratic formula on the second one, and the first one is always the opposite sign. So you're going to practice factoring again, but you're going to finish with solving. Make sure if there's any that have a GCF, I don't know if they do. If you pull out a GCF of a number, so like you would have had 2x cubed minus 16, and we would pull out a 2, this would not hurt your answer at all, okay? You just mark it out, it doesn't matter. But if you had something like this, and you pull out an x, that x is going to give you an answer of 0, okay? So be aware of that, all right? And then you would do the rest of them. So if you start with a 4th, you should have 4 answers. I don't know that I put any on there like that, but it might generate it on somebody's like that. Okay, so just be ready. Your assignment is on Edia. I'm going to let you go. Hold on just a second, and I will call your name to let you out because I know somebody came in late that I didn't mark down. All right. I'm going to stop sharing, stop recording.